Brothers and friends, it's indeed a joy to be with you here this evening in your beautiful Kingdom Hall. My name is Charles Jackson, and my wife's name is Evelyn. And we're happy to have Brother and Sister Conti with us, your new circuit overseer and his wife. The four of us are strangers in a way to you. I know that my wife and I have not seen you for quite a while because of having some other assignments, and of course the Contis are new to your circuit. But all four of us are very happy to be with you this very special week of activity. And mind you, what makes it special is not the fact that the Contis and the Jacksons are here. That's part of it. You think about it yourself. How special would it be this evening if just the four of us were here solamente? It would not be very special. But the fact that all of us are here together, Jehovah's brought all of us together at this time to encourage us and build us up. That's what makes it special. And brothers, don't we need it here in this time of the end. And of course, at the end of our week together, at our circuit assembly rather, we're going to be encouraged still more. In fact, the theme of our 2 days together has to do with keeping close in mind Jehovah's Day. 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 11 and verse 12. And the governing body has, in a very interesting way, taken those verses and helped us to see, number one, why it's so important to keep close in mind Jehovah's Day. After all, when Peter wrote those words, it was yet many years before the end of that Jewish system of things, and of course 1900 years before our time, the time of the end for us. And yet, under inspiration, Peter wrote, keep close in mind Jehovah's Day. Well, why? Why is it so important? And how do we do that? So we're going to be talking about those things at our circuit assembly, and you brothers are going to really enjoy it. The district overseer gets a chance to see the circuit assembly program about 25 times during the year, and each time we see it, we really enjoy it, and we know that you will enjoy it too. We also know that it's not easy to warm up to strangers sometimes, and we want to assure you, and I'm speaking both for the Contis as well as my wife and I, that we are your brothers, and we're here for a positive purpose. We're not here to test your knowledge. We're not here to make you nervous. What kind of special week would that be if we came and put that kind of pressure on you? We'd like to get to know you and have you get to know us too. We've had a chance to meet a few before the meeting started, but we'd like to work with you in the field ministry. We're going to meet at 9 o'clock each morning, Wednesday through Friday. And then we're going to meet in the afternoon, 1:15 on Wednesday and Thursday. Friday afternoon, the Contis and the Jacksons will be preparing for the circuit assembly. So you have several opportunities to come out and work in the service with us. We'll be distributing our tract, as you know, and we're all looking forward to that. And remember, this is a special week, so special things happen during special weeks. I remember one of the sisters in one of the congregations we served had not even thought about coming out that much because she worked, but she took the special invitations very personal to come out in the service, and she went home and prayed to Jehovah about it, and then next day she went and talked to her employer, and he gave her some time, a few hours, along with her lunch, and she came out one day. And the day that she came out, she started her first Bible study. You think that was a special day for her, a part of that special week? And let me tell you something. You're the host congregation, East Pompano, right? You know how often you get to be host congregation? Maybe once every 15 to 20 years with the way things are growing. So that tells you how special this week is. And we'd love to share it with you. So why not put forth that special effort if you can? And of course, if you cannot, we'll see you on the weekend at the circuit assembly. You can be with us in spirit. And it may be that on your way to work, if you'd like to come and have the text with us in the morning, or stop by in the afternoon and just share our brief meeting for service in the afternoon before you have to run off to work, please feel free to do that. We're here to be with you. We are here to be with you. And we want to cherish every moment of that. And so we appreciate your effort to do that. Now, one thing that we like to talk about, both my wife and me, is the Bible reading for the week. Because sometimes it's hard rather to know what a person likes to talk about. I can talk about baseball and basketball. I can talk about the weather. I can talk about those things too. But I like to talk about the Bible reading for the week, John chapters 1 through 3. There are a lot of interesting points for daily living, a lot of good feel points, a lot of very interesting and encouraging things in the Bible reading. For instance, let me just raise one. John chapter 2 and verse 19. Now, there, Jesus said, "Break down this temple, and I will build it up in 3 days," or "I will raise it up in 3 days." Remember that? Now, why did he say, "I will raise it up in 3 days"? Did Jesus raise himself? Was that a proper thing to say? Well, yes, it was, obviously, else he would not have said it. And that was a question from readers over 24 years ago. Someone asked that question. That's just one of the things we can talk about, okay? Or maybe you'd like to talk about some of those verses in John that seem to support the Trinity doctrine. We can talk about that too. Now, mind you, I don't want you to think that if you work with Brother Jackson, I'm going to bombard you with questions. That wouldn't be very comforting, would it? So the only way that I'm going to talk about the Bible reading is if you start. If you don't say a word, then I talk about the weather, I talk about all kinds of things, okay? But if you'd like to talk about the Bible reading, we'd love to do that. Now, you notice this evening, our theme is in the form of a question. What has God promised? And sitting there, you might be thinking to yourself, well, Brother Jackson, Jehovah has made many promises. To which do you refer? And that is true. And every single one of Jehovah's promises, like Paul says in Hebrews chapter 6, means so much to us. They give us hope. They're like an anchor for our soul. But I want you to just think for a moment of all of Jehovah's wonderful promises. Which one do you look forward to the most? When you think of the conditions that we have to live under and what Jehovah has promised, you think of the fact that even many of our brothers are ill, some seriously so, and that many are suffering through opposition and difficulties at work, at school, in the neighborhood. When you think about all of the terrible conditions in the world, isn't it true that Jehovah's promise of paradise is so inviting to us? You think about the resurrection as a part of that. And I'm sure that there are those that you're looking forward to welcoming back from the dead. My dad died about 11 years ago. And even though he did not get a chance to reach the point of dedication and baptism, he was so favorable for the truth, and I'm looking forward to seeing him again, praying that he's in Jehovah's memory. Now, I'm sure that there is somebody like that you hold near and dear. So you would probably say yes, paradise, this wonderful physical paradise. That's what God has promised. Well, evidently, Jehovah has promised more than a physical paradise. Now, why do I say that? Suppose someone challenged you and gave you a Bible and asked you to give them some details about paradise. Tell me, what kind of houses will we live in paradise? What kind of food will we eat in paradise? What kind of clothing will we wear in paradise? You children, what kind of games will we play in paradise? Will there be baseball in paradise? Here, take this book and give me some details about this physical paradise. Now, you would be hard-pressed to do that, wouldn't you? You know why? This is a big, thick book, but it's about more than this physical paradise. Now, let's prove that. Would you take your Bible, please, and turn to Deuteronomy chapter 6. We're going back to the year 1473 BCE, Deuteronomy chapter 6. Once everyone's turned there, we'll give you a little background as to what we're about to read. Deuteronomy chapter 6, and we're going to start reading at verse number 10. But before we read, just a little bit of what this is about. Now, many of you who are Bible readers remember that in the year 1513 BCE, Jehovah God released his people from a terrible oppression to the then world power Egypt. And they had been in captivity for over 200 years to this Egyptian world power, over 215 years. And as we said, this was a very harsh and oppressive subjection. As you read in the book of Exodus, the Israelites were slaves to the Egyptians. And so they were very happy as a group of people under the leadership of Moses to be released from this. And here in 1513 BCE, Jehovah God brought his people to the foot of Mount Sinai, and he made them a nation. No longer were they a patriarchal society. He made them his nation. He gave them a constitution, you see. Now, this was something very official. But it was interesting, from 1513 BCE to 1473 BCE, exactly 40 years, the Israelites wandered in the wilderness. And what we're about to read is they're being ushered into this veritable paradise that Jehovah gave them. Here in Deuteronomy 6 and verse 10, and it must occur that when Jehovah your God will bring you into the land that he swore to your forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give you great and good-looking cities that you did not build, and houses full of all good things that you did not fill, and cisterns hewn out that you did not hew out, vineyards and olive trees that you did not plant, and you shall have eaten and become satisfied. Now, isn't that interesting? If you can picture this, Jehovah God would take these people and usher them into a land where the houses were already built and constructed, and the larders, the pantries, were already full of all good things. All of this slow-growing vegetation would be bearing fruit. There would be cisterns and olive trees and vineyards, and he just gave all of this to them, see. Now, the question is, why did Jehovah God give his people a physical paradise? You say, well, Brother Jackson, he loved them, see. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were their forefathers, and they were faithful men, and so Jehovah, out of love and appreciation, and this relationship that he had with these men, gave their descendants this paradise. Well, that's true, but it's more than that. There's more to it than that. If you look at verse 4, we begin to understand Jehovah's reasoning. Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 4. Listen, O Israel, Jehovah our God is one Jehovah. And you must love Jehovah your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your vital force. And these words that I am commanding you today must prove to be on your heart. And you must inculcate them in your son, and speak of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk on the road, and when you lie down, and when you get up. And you must tie them as a sign upon your hand, and they must serve as a frontlet band between your eyes. And you must write them upon the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Now, did you notice something there? Did you notice what Jehovah wanted his people to be preoccupied with? In Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 1 through verse 3, he says, I want you to serve me. But directly related to this service is the motive for it. He says, in order to serve me, you have to love me. See? Now, he says, I want you to love me with every fiber of your existence. I want you to love me with your whole heart, your whole soul, your whole mind. Now, let me ask you, can you love someone you don't know like that? Can you give your all in love to someone who's a stranger to you? What do you think? No. Doesn't work like that. Right? Two people get married. We're talking about marriage, right? Two people get married. On the day that they get married, I walk up to the groom, I walk up to the bride, I ask, why did you marry this man? Why did you marry this woman? They say, because what? I love him. I love her, right? 20 years later, the marriage has been beautiful. What has happened to that love? What has happened to that love? It grows, it gets stronger, doesn't it? What makes it get stronger? What makes it grow? Isn't all the things that they've learned about one another? They have more reasons to love. See, when he first saw her, she was a beautiful young thing. See, no one stays. No one stays. Physical things change, right? So it goes beyond that. So then he saw her as the caretaker of their resources together, helping him through sickness and through good times, see. And everything he learned about her gave him more reasons to love her even more. When she first saw him, he was a handsome young hunk. That changed. And then she saw him as the father of their children, a protector, a provider. She got to know him in all those different ways, and that love deepened and became strong. See, that's the same thing that happens with Jehovah. The more we learn about him, we see the fulfillment of his prophecies. We see those 7 major covenants and how they form a legal framework for his even dealing with us. And we get deeper and deeper, and we're just in awe. We say, oh my, look at what Jehovah has done for us, for me. I love him with everything I have. But you notice, he says now, in order to love like that, in verse 6, he's talking to the parents. He says, and these words that I'm commanding you today must prove to be on your heart. Now, first, as a parent, he says you have to get them on your heart. And then, verse 7, you must inculcate them in your son. That means to sound them down by means of repetition. When you sit in your house, when you walk on the road, when you lie down, when you get up, every opportunity. Now just think. Just think about what you know about the Israelites. They had wandered in the wilderness because of a lack of faith. The whole generation died off. What happened to any Israelite that knew anything about building houses? What happened to any Israelite that knew anything about agriculture? They didn't just walk into the land flowing with milk and honey. They had to dispossess 31 enemy kings. What happened to any Israelite that knew anything about warfare, that had any experience with warfare? They had been in Egypt for 215 years. What happened to any Israelite that knew anything about building cisterns? You know what a cistern is? Sometimes you hear people say, well, it's a well. It's not a well. It's more than that. It's a whole collection system for collecting ground water and rainwater. They have found cisterns in Jerusalem 700 feet in circumference, 40 feet deep in the ground, holding 2 to 3 million gallons of water. It's an engineering feat is what it is. Now, Jehovah said to the Israelites, he says, Exodus 19:4-5, you're going to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation to me. That's what he wanted. And if they had followed that arrangement to its conceivable end, then they would have been in heaven with Christ Jesus, ruling in that heavenly kingdom. That's what he wanted. But in order to do that, he says, you have to love me with everything you have. And in order to love me, you have to know me. And in order to know me, you have to read, you have to study, you have to put first things first. So I'll tell you what. So that you can do that, so that you can put spiritual things first in your life, I'm going to give you a paradise. I'm going to give you physical things so that you can put spiritual things first. Isn't that beautiful? Isn't Jehovah a wonderful God? That's what this was all about. That's why he did it. Do you see that? I see a couple of heads going like that. Okay. But then he gave them a warning. Look at verse 12, chapter 6, verse 12. He says, watch out for yourself, that you may not forget Jehovah, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slaves. You see, Jehovah knew his people, and he knew imperfection, and he knew what was most important, you see. He knew what we're just finding out. This book is not about things. It's about qualities. It's about a spiritual paradise that Jehovah God has created for humans so that they can prepare for the physical paradise, so that they can qualify for that physical paradise. You can give your wife diamonds and pearls. You can give your children all the Nintendo games that money can buy. You can give her the family the biggest house, the most luxurious car. But if there is no spirituality in that home, if husband and wife are at each other's throats, or children are rebellious and unappreciative, then how happy are we? Suppose you were the one in the neighborhood with the most beautiful home, and everyone around you was profane and violent and physical, fleshly, so that you'd have to put up locks and alarms and bars at your windows. Then how much would you enjoy all those wonderful material things that you had, with all these people around you lacking spirituality? So the most important thing in our lives is spirituality, our relationship with Jehovah, so that we could put that first, so that the Israelites could put that first. Jehovah gave them these physical things. And then he warned them. He says, watch out. He expands on that warning in Deuteronomy chapter 8. Just turn a page or so over. You see chapter 8 and verse number 10? Now he's more specific with the warning here. He says, when you have eaten and satisfied yourself, you must also bless Jehovah your God for the good land that he has given you. Watch out for yourself that you may not forget Jehovah your God, so as not to keep his commandments and his judicial decisions and his statutes that I am commanding you today. For fear that you may eat and indeed satisfy yourself, you may build good houses and indeed dwell in them, and your herd and your flock may increase, and silver and gold may increase for you, and all that is yours may increase, and your heart may indeed be lifted up, and you may indeed forget Jehovah your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slaves, who caused you to walk through the great and fear-inspiring wilderness, with poisonous serpents and scorpions, and with thirsty ground that has no water, who brought forth water for you out of the flinty rock, who fed you with manna in the wilderness, which your fathers had not known, in order to humble you, in order to put you to the test, so as to do you good in your after days. And you do say in your heart, listen to what can happen. My own power and the full might of my own hand have made this wealth for me. No, 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 no. That's not how it happened. That's not what it's all about. No. See, you're missing the point. My education did this, you see. My strength, no. Look at verse 18. You must remember Jehovah your God, because he is the giver of power to you to make wealth. Why? In order to carry out his covenant that he swore to your forefathers as at this day. He says, I'm giving you this so that you can put first things first in your life. Now, I wish that I could stand here and say that mankind, even Jehovah's people, have learned this lesson. It's a very difficult lesson, and Jehovah knows that. He knows how sometimes the very things that he has given us so that we can put first things first in our lives themselves become a distraction. And so even to the Christian congregation, he has given this warning. You remember in Philippians chapter 1, verse 9 and verse 10, the Apostle Paul said, make sure, what? Make sure. Anyone remember how that ends up there? Please, yes, sister. Yeah, so what was he talking about? Was he talking about the mortgage? The car payment? The utility bill? No. In the context of the scripture, he's talking about spiritual things, accurate knowledge, discernment. The fruit of God's Holy Spirit, you see. Those are the more important things. And you remember when Jesus was on the earth? Let's go to Matthew chapter 6. Jesus was very clear in helping Christians to understand that he understood that sometimes with material things there can be this immediacy or seeming immediacy when physical things are threatened, you know. In Matthew chapter 6 and verse 19, in fact, throughout this whole chapter, in the Sermon on the Mount, he talks about putting spiritual things first. In 19, stop storing up for yourselves treasures upon the earth where moth and rust consume, where thieves break in and steal. Rather store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Spiritual things it's talking about here. And here's where the New World Translation Reference Bible is so superior. In some Bibles it says do not, do not, so forth and so on. But that's not what Jesus said. He said stop. It's a strong negative command. It indicates what they were doing, which the simple term do not does not. And it says stop it right now. Stop it. And then he goes on to mention in verse 24, no one can slave for two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other. Verse 25, on this account I say to you, stop being anxious about your souls. There it is again, the strong negative command as to what you will eat or what you will drink. We get worried about that sometime, And then there's that temptation to take the spiritual thing and put it in the background and worry about the physical thing, see. But then he asks, does not the soul mean more than food and the body than clothing? When you stop and think, you say yes. Remember the little examples that we gave earlier? If there's no spirituality in the home, what good is it? I mean, even if you have all these things, how happy can you be, right? And then in verse 26, very interestingly, an illustration. He says, observe intently the birds of heaven, because they do not sow seed or reap or gather into storehouses. You stop and think. That's true. They don't. When's the last time you saw a bird in Publix? At the checkout counter, right? I'll take this bag of birdseed. Boom. I have a coupon. They're not agricultural. They don't have fields somewhere, but yet they're taken care of, right? And it's interesting. He says, observe intently the birds of heaven. In other words, it's like saying, take notice. Look, there. See? Now, why would he speak like that? Did you see any birds today? In your comings and goings? Did you? See some heads going like that. Do you remember how many there were? What kind they were? What they were doing? Remember all those details? In most cases, we don't. Because birds just fade into the background. We really don't notice them, You know how many birds there are in the world? You ever wonder? Probably not. But I was reading an Old Awake magazine one year, and they mentioned that some expert came up with the figure of 100 billion. Now, how he got all those birds to stand still, I don't know. But can you imagine 100 billion birds? Now, have you ever heard the expression, he eats like a bird, she eats like a bird, The inference is that the person eats very little, but really birds eat a lot. Some eat 6 times their weight in food every day. 6 times. Now, I know what 6 times would be for me. We won't get into that. But that's a lot of food. Can you imagine 100 billion birds? 100 billion birds some eating up to 6 times their weight in food every day, and yet they have no fields, no jobs. And Jehovah does it so smoothly that we never even notice, because Jesus had to say, look, observe, watch. And Jesus used that. He said, now look, if Jehovah can do that, aren't you worth more than the birds? Jesus didn't die for the birds. He died for you. And you know how glorious Solomon was. And he can't touch the lilies of the field. And then he says in verse 31, as he makes the application, he says, so never be anxious and say, what are we to eat, or what are we to drink, or what are we to put on? Now, in the Greek, you know how we have these tenses? We have past tense, future tense, in English? Well, the Greeks have a tense that other languages don't have. They have what is called a punctiliar tense, or an aorist tense. And that's what makes the Greek language so colorful, because it is so graphic and so descriptive. And so when Jesus said never, he meant not one moment. Not one moment. Never be anxious. That's the aorist tense, or the punctiliar tense, you see. And he said, we have no reason. Look at verse number 32. He says, for all these things are the things the nations are eagerly pursuing, for your heavenly Father knows you need all these things. He says, you have a heavenly Father. You know, he's our creator, it's true, but he's our Father. And just the mere mention of that means something very specific to us. I was watching a TV program, and it was about drunk driving, about the people who've been killed by drunk drivers. And this father was describing his feelings. His daughter had been killed by a drunk driver. And as he sat there talking to the narrator, the interviewer, and the tears are just streaming down his face. And you get the feeling that only a father has these feelings, has these emotions. He said, if I only could, I would trade places with her today. Such a young life snuffed out like that. He says, if I only could, I would do that. See, that's a father. That's how a father feels. Jehovah's our heavenly Father. He knows our needs, he says. He says, you're not like the nations. The nations depend upon themselves. Jehovah knows what you need. And so he says in verse 30, such a young life snuffed out like that. He says, if I only could, I would do that. See, that's a father. That's how a father feels. Jehovah's our heavenly Father. He knows our needs, he says. He says, you're not like the nations. The nations depend upon themselves. Jehovah knows what you need. And so he says in verse 33, keep on then seeking first the kingdom and his righteousness, and all these other things will be added to you. So here we have this two-way principle. Jehovah says, if you do this, if you keep putting spiritual things first in your life, then I'll make sure you have the physical things you need. And Jesus believed that, and that's the way he lived his life, you see. But like we said, the Israelites struggle with that. And so here, in 1513 BCE, they were released. 1473, they finally went into this physical paradise. And just a short time later, they failed to put spiritual things first again. 607 BCE, there they were again, in subjection to the Babylonians, because they lost their faith in Jehovah's ability to provide for them. And so for 70 years, the land lay desolate. Many were taken to Babylon. A whole generation grew up there. But the subjugation of the Israelite people in Babylon was not like what happened in Egypt. The Israelites really prospered in Babylon. In fact, some had their own businesses. Some became quite rich. And so in 537 BCE, when Jehovah said to go back to Palestine, to Jerusalem, and rebuild the temple and reestablish true worship, it was something that some hesitated to do, see? But the question was, were they going to put spiritual things first in their life? Had they learned their lesson? Now let me ask you, if you were the Israelite people with that background, would you have learned your lesson? Would you have? Would you say that now I'm going to put spiritual things, no matter what, I'm going to put spiritual things first in my life? So they go back. You remember? You remember why the temple had to be there? In about 500 years, a very famous man would come to the earth. He would have to die outside the walls of that temple, right? The priesthood had to be in place because he would have to have an adversarial relationship with the priesthood. Jewish law would have to be there because he'd have to be judged by Jewish law. So really, the reason that Jehovah had for sending his people back had ramifications not just for them, but for every man, woman, and child that would ever live on the face of the earth. All of us sitting here tonight. And Jehovah was very serious. Go back and do what I've told you to do. Put me first. So they went back, and they got to it. 537, 536, worked hard. 536 to 520, well, that was a different story. That was a different story. They got sidetracked again. Here, let's read about it. Haggai chapter 1. Jehovah had to send Haggai and Zephaniah and other prophets to them. Now, you say, Brother Jackson, where is Haggai? It's a very small book, and it's right between Zephaniah and Zechariah. It's one of the so-called minor prophets, because it is so small, but very significant. So here we are in 520 BCE. Are you following me? 520? Okay. And you get an idea of what was happening in verse 2 of chapter 1. Would you read that with me? This is what Jehovah of armies has said. As regards this people, they have said, the time has not come, the time of the house of Jehovah for it to be built. So here they were taking this project and putting it aside. Well, what were they preoccupied with? Look at verse 4. Is it the time for yourselves to dwell in your paneled houses while this house is waste? The prophet asks. And now this is what Jehovah of armies has said. Set your heart upon your ways. You've sown much seed, but there's a bringing of little in. Oh, they were working hard. And you notice they were in paneled houses. Paneled houses. See, they were going to live as they lived in Babylon. They lived well in Babylon. So can you imagine coming back to a land that had laid fallow for 70 years, all the weeds and all the mowing you'd have to catch up with, and getting that land in shape, you see? So they weren't going to sacrifice. So they said, here, Jehovah back here, us up here. That's what we'll do, see? And we'll work hard for moi, see? So that's what they did. You've sown much seed, but there's a bringing of little in. There's an eating, but it is not to satisfaction. There's a drinking, but not to the point of getting intoxicated. Can you imagine? The quality of wine was so poor they couldn't even... There's a putting on of clothes, but it is not with anyone's getting warm. And he that is hiring himself out is hiring himself out for a bag having holes. Do you get the picture? The Israelite got paid at the end of every 12-hour day. See, he had his own inheritance, but he couldn't make ends meet. You know what it means, make ends meet? You know, you take these ends, these financial responsibilities, and you try to make them meet, right? But they were working hard, and they couldn't make them meet, so what they would do is hire themselves out. In addition to working their own land, they would hire themselves out to their fellow Israelites. And even at that, it was like, at the end of the day, where's the money? You know? Like it went out through a hole in the money bag. I mean, that hurts, doesn't it? Have you ever lost your paycheck? Hope that has never happened to you. I mean, to feel such a sense of waste and lost, see? Now, Jehovah says in verse 7, this is what Jehovah of armies has said, set your heart upon your ways. There's a reason why this is happening. See? Verse 9. He says there was a looking for much, but here there was just a little. And you brought it into the house, and I blew upon it. For what reason is the utterance of Jehovah of armies? By reason of my house it is waste. While you are on the run, each one in behalf of his own house. Therefore over you the heavens kept back their dew, and the earth itself kept back its yield. And I kept calling for dryness upon the earth, and upon the mountains, and upon the grain, and upon the new wine, and upon the oil, and upon what the ground would bring forth, and upon earthling man, and upon domestic animal, and upon all the toil of the hands. Isn't that interesting? You ever wonder why sometimes people work very hard and nothing seems to come together? In some households, everybody's working. Mama's working, daddy's working, big brother's working. He's got a paper route, you know. Little sister, she's babysitting. Everybody in this house works. Even Fido works. Fido's got to go get the slippers when Dad comes home. He's trained to do that. There's no free ride in this house, you see. And even though everyone's working, it seems like the ends never come together. That can happen. Why? Because sometimes individuals leave out the most important ingredient in the formula, and that's Jehovah. No one can be successful at anything without his blessing. Now, we're not saying that Jehovah's Witnesses lead charmed lives. There are brothers all over the world who suffer for one reason or another, but they never suffer because Jehovah withholds his blessing. They never suffer for that reason. Here, Jehovah says he can withhold his blessing if a person gets things out of perspective. Let me give you an example. Let's say that in this fictitious family, there's a mother, a father, there are 2 children. And one night after the children are in bed, mom and dad are in the kitchen talking. And you can tell it's serious. You can tell by the countenance, you know. Dad says, honey. That's what he calls her. He says, honey, I have a chance to do some overtime at work for about 9 months. Now, I wanted to talk to you about it because it's going to mean such a drastic change in our life. It's going to affect my study with the children. It's going to affect some of my meetings and my field service. But, you know, we can really use the money. So they talk about it and they decide, go for it. 9 months later, here we fast forward, they're in the kitchen again, and this time you can tell that something's changed because there's sadness. Children are in bed again. Dad turns to mother. He still calls her honey. He says, honey, you know, things haven't worked out the way we've planned. All that money I made, I didn't realize it put me in a different tax bracket. And so the government has most of what I earned, he says. And so, you know, where the other half is gone, he reaches into his pocket, he pulls out these huge white pills. He says, I've worked myself into exhaustion and ruined my health. The government has half of my raise and the doctor has the other half. And he says, you know something, I've noticed that since I've been working, we hardly see each other. I'm gone during the nights. You're at work during the day. We pass like ships in the night. We hardly have a chance to talk. I can't remember the last time we prayed together or studied the Watchtower or read the Bible together. And have you noticed, even when we do talk, it usually winds up in an argument? Something's changed. Have you noticed how the children used to talk about baptism? Junior wanted to go to Bethel. You never hear him talk about that. Our little girl wants to get married. She can't wait till she gets married one day, and she's not even a teenager. And all Big Brother can talk about is getting a job like Daddy, working hard, and getting a car. He turns to his wife and asks, what happened? Where did we go wrong? Haggai chapter 2. Look at verse 11. You see, there is a spiritual explanation. In verse 11, this is what Jehovah of Armies has said. Ask, please, the priests as to the law, saying, if a man carries holy flesh in the skirt of his garment, and he actually touches with his skirt bread or stew or wine or oil or any sort of food, will it become holy? Now, you know what holy flesh is, right? And if you can imagine the priest, the under priests, carrying in their garment, their skirts, the sacrifice. That's holy flesh. Carrying it around. It's different phases of offering to Jehovah. He says, if he touches with his skirt bread or stew or wine or any sort of food, will it become holy? Now, the priest knew the answer to that. The priest proceeded to answer and say, no! You see the exclamation mark? You can't take something that belongs to Jehovah and use it for another reason, contaminate it. And Haggai went on to say, if someone unclean by a deceased soul touches any of these things, will it become unclean? In turn, the priest answered and said, it will become unclean. Now, you see how quickly contamination can spread. Now, here's the point. Here's the application. Look at verse 14. Accordingly, Haggai answered and said, that is how this people is. And that is how this nation is before me, is the utterance of Jehovah. And that is how all the work of their hands is. And whatever they present here, it is unclean. Now, mind you, it wasn't as if the Israelites had stopped going to the temple. They were still going to the temple, but they weren't offering their best to Jehovah. And Jehovah knew it. See, he's not blind, so he knew it. And he said, I don't accept it. And what made it unacceptable was the fact that they were unclean. Now, he doesn't say that they committed adultery, that they were idolaters, that is what made them unclean, but it was a frame of mind, an attitude towards spiritual things. The very fact that they would take spiritual things and put them in the background and put other things ahead of Jehovah made them unclean in Jehovah's eyes. There's a saying, he who gives God second place gives him no place. And so Jehovah sensed this. He says, I'm a great king. Who do you think I am? I know when you're not giving me your best. I know when you are taking what I've given you and putting it ahead of me. He says, no, I can't bless you that way. So here the Israelites were working hard, but everything they touched, remember, they were unclean in Jehovah's eyes. You remember how quickly contamination spread, so now everything they touched, every effort they made became what? In Jehovah's eyes. So no matter how hard they worked, Jehovah couldn't bless what they did. Powerful. Such an important point for us to remember today. And why is Jehovah reminding us of things like this? Keep close in mind Jehovah's day. It's because he wants to give us life. That's his promise to us. And he doesn't want us to fall into a position where we can't have that. So these are very loving reminders, you see. I was talking to a sister in St. Louis years ago. She's a single parent. She had 2 children that she was raising by herself. And she said, you could tell she was agitated and anxious. She said, Brother Jackson, I need to talk to you for a moment. And so we went off in the corner, we talked. She said, I'm not making my evening meetings. I have a job that keeps me from coming to the Kingdom Hall in the evening. I said, well, sister, I can't tell you what to do about your job. That's personal. She said, I know, but I need my meetings. I feel myself going down spiritually. But I have these 2 children. I'm a single parent, and I need this job. I said, tell you what you want to do, and then let him direct you. Let him bless you. She said, okay. Very next meeting, true story, very next meeting, which was 2 days later, she called me from across the Kingdom Hall, and I could tell right away that something was different. She was lit up, you see. She said, Brother Jackson, guess what? I said, what? She said, I did exactly what we talked about. I went home, I poured out my heart to Jehovah. And I looked up the scriptures, and I thought about them, and I thought about what I wanted to do and what should be most important in my life. And then the next day I went to my employer, and I told him, I said, look, I need this job. I'm a single parent. But you know something? I need my meetings more. We have to do something. And guess what? He gave me my meeting nights off. She said, isn't that wonderful? I said, I'm so happy for you. She said, but wait, there's more. He gave me a raise. She said, I didn't ask for a raise. He just gave it to me. Now, I'm not saying if you go in tomorrow and talk to your employer that you're going to get a raise. I'm not saying that. Okay? But do you see how the principle applied? Matthew 6:33, he says, you do this, I'm going to do this. Now look at Haggai chapter 2, verse 18. He says, set your heart, please, on this, from this day and forward, from the 24th day of the 9th month, from the day that the foundation of the temple of Jehovah was laid, set your heart on this. Is there as yet the seed in the grain pit? And as yet the vine and the fig tree and the pomegranate tree and the olive tree? It has not borne, has it? In other words, you look at your life, he says. Are you as happy as you can possibly be? Do you have full assurance that you are putting Jehovah first, putting spiritual things first in your life? Do you remember the day you were baptized? Do you remember how when you went down into the water and you came up, how good you felt? How do you feel today? How do you feel about your service to Jehovah? See, all of these are outgrowths of this wonderful reasoning that Jehovah's carrying us through. All Jehovah wants is for us to give him the very best that we have, Some of us are up in age. Others are sick. Others are in different conditions. But Jehovah will help us to give him the very best we have and put spiritual things, the things that will mean life for us, first in our lives. He says, from this day I shall bestow blessing. You see that? Verse 19. From what day? From which day? What's he talking about? Matthew 6:33. When you put spiritual things first, seek first God's kingdom and his righteousness, and all these other things will be added to you. What a beautiful God we serve. He knows what's in our best interest. And he's asking us to set our hearts upon our ways, to know what he has promised. He has promised a wonderful spiritual paradise. We're in it right now. And he wants us to take full advantage of it through prayer, through family study, through the meetings, every single one of them, not just a few, not just selective ones, every single one. We need them. He says, put these things first in your life. Prayer, the field service, all these things that I have given you. He says, if you do well in this spiritual paradise, it will prepare you for the physical paradise to come. Look at what God has promised. Thank you, Jehovah. We appreciate your kind attention, and it's so good to be with you friends here this week. We're looking forward to working with you and getting to know you better, okay? And let's bring our meeting to an end. Would you like to stand? And we're going to sing song number 220, and then we'll have a concluding prayer. Song number 220, based on 2 Corinthians 12:4, Our Paradise, Present and Future.